Well, sometimes we do themes on the channel based on what I've gotten to see recently, and our current theme is maces. Specifically, prehistoric Central and South American maces. This is not one of those, obviously. It's just a great old illustration. Quite an interesting specimen there, huh? But that's just to set us off on our journey as we talk about this weapon type some more. I'm not going to retread too much ground here, but yeah, the mace, one of the most common and really effective melee weapons there has been. Is my opponent wearing mail, scale, plate? Doesn't matter. I can still bash him with an instrument like this. Now, you would think in the Americas, in the prehistorical era, well, throughout all time, when your opponent was never wearing metal armor, that the mace would not be as big of a thing, because any kind of an edged instrument, and they did have edged weapons, would be preferable. Here are some Aztec warriors, and next you're going to see some Inca warriors, and in both cases, none of them are what we would consider to be heavily armored. You're mostly talking padded armor, that kind of thing, which was effective. But back to my point, might seem surprising, like, I don't know, getting through there, penetrating through that with a spear or something like that might seem like a better option than a blunt impact instrument. And yet, we have objects like this, which I showed in a previous video, this exquisite green jade mace head from Costa Rica. Now, something this exquisite was probably a prestige item, but it still shows how important the weapon type was overall. I also showed you this pretty much unbelievable white jade mace head from Costa Rica, again emphasizing how ubiquitous this weapon type was, and how important in pre-Columbian America, and that's definitely all of the Americas. We're focusing on Central and South America, but yeah, the North American warriors, but the Iwarajinga, stone mace heads, that was a very big deal there as well. Like this one from my collection. It's such a simple contrivance, but it gives you so much benefit, regardless of, what kind of technology, what kind of materials you have available. One more. So here's a Native American one. I did a video on this one a long time ago from my personal collection. So there's a stone encased in that hide sack. This is a Cree slungshot war club. A little bit off topic, but honestly, I actually just couldn't help it. Good excuse to break that thing out. First time in a long time. So, back to our subject proper. If you paid close attention when I showed this illustration, there's two maces. Here's the first one. Probably all wood, maybe, stone on a wooden haft, but more importantly, it might have caught your eye, the star-shaped head on this one here. Now, star-shaped heads were an Inca standard when it comes to the mace, and we could see why it would be such a common type. It's a great design for this kind of thing because it doesn't matter which part of the weapon you end up hitting with, you're going to hit with one of those reduced surface knobs and maximize your impact. But here's the surprise, I'm finally going to show you the one that we're going to focus on today, the one I saw in person. It is of this type, but note that these here are clearly made of stone, as you or I might expect, but this one here is not. You're looking at an authentic Inca metal star-shaped mace head. So yes, that was a thing, but that's just the beginning of the surprises here. What you're looking at is a copper-silver alloy. Copper was, of course, used in conjunction with tin to make bronze. That was done in South America as well. And yet the Americas never really had a Bronze Age. And if that was going to happen anywhere, it would have been in South America, where metalworking was taken to its highest level of sophistication. In fact, they were the first metalworkers in the world to work with platinum. Some of the techniques they used with gold and silver were so impressive, it really took modern science quite a bit of work to figure out how they did it. So why then didn't they have more things like this? Here's a bronze axe head from South America. And then why didn't they from there, go on a similar technological path to, say, Europe? The answer is complicated, so complicated that academics are still just wondering. There is no set answer. But let's go back to our baseline here, warfare in the Inca Empire. Here we see an ancient illustration, and notice it's exactly like the modern one that we looked at before. The difference is this is from 1613, and we're looking at an Inca emperor. And it confirms the research I've done, and that modern artist from before knew his or her stuff, because yeah, these were the two primary weapons for a warrior, the sling and mace. And this drawing confirms that the exact type of mace we're looking at in today's video was important enough that an emperor would be portrayed wielding one. And would someone like him be holding a stone one, like what you saw earlier, or one like this? Well, the answer is obvious. And you can imagine how shiny this thing was when it was in pristine condition. See on the ring there, it's not as much corrosion. It must have been absolutely gorgeous in its heyday. And metal, especially gold and silver, were of religious, mythic significance to the Incas. Silver was believed to be the tears of the moon. Meanwhile, gold was believed to be the sweat of the sun. The metalsmiths making something like this, therefore, were working with bodily manifestations of the gods themselves. Now, here's the kind of thing we typically think of when we think of metalsmiths in South America. Gorgeous, golden, ornamental objects. And that's where the majority of the metalsmith knowledge and skill was applied, and that's what was valued by the society, especially when we understand the mythic importance, right? And well, this quote-unquote knife here would not hold up very well in a fight at all. The mace head I held would. I mean, as far as I can tell, it was very heavy and dense. But maybe the overall attitude is why we see many more things like this and less like this. There's another very workmanlike bronze implement. But overall, it's hard to say, and we're just not sure. Was it availability of resources that had something to do with it? Was it just, less tin deposits, things like that? It was just not as convenient to get into that realm. Meanwhile, there's like gold and silver everywhere, right, in the Andes. That could be a part of it. Maybe there just wasn't enough of what you need, at least conveniently, to get into, mass production of weapons like this. And on this one, if I told you that you were looking at a prehistoric mace head from, bronze mace head from the Middle East or Europe, you wouldn't question it, but this is from South America. So they had this kind of thing and obviously understood the utility of it, right? Metal hits pretty darn hard, and it will outlast stone. And nevertheless, an item like ours was the exception and not the rule. Remember the sling and star-headed mace combination? Well, this also holds true for sling ammunition. Some academics argue that this is just a matter of practicality, that metal didn't outperform stone when it comes to, a club head, a mace head, or a sling bullet enough to be worth the effort. A related hypothesis is that the land itself, right, the landscape in South America and elsewhere in the Americas lended itself against slashing type weapons in battle, whereas it promoted that kind of thing in the Middle East, basically the cradle of civilization. I find the first one to be more credible than the second. Striking someone with a stone star on the end of a stick, is that different than striking them with a metal star or ball or whatever? Probably not, I suppose. Now, I'd take the metal one every single time before going into battle if given the option. Quick side note, I think the scholar who made that case and others who support that side failed to stop and think about the importance of the sling, since that was the primary ranged weapon and hugely important. Would you rather carry acorn-sized bullets or lemon-sized bullets? Clearly, the smaller, meaning metal, would be handier. You can carry many more of them into battle easily, and they strike with a greatly reduced surface area. But we're concerned with bashers and mashers today, so back to that and the latter theory. Here's the Incan Empire, basically runs along the Andes, and no, I don't believe that has to do with why they didn't produce lots of metal weapons. Now, the northernmost tip barely gets into Colombia, but it's pretty similar territory, and that's where my family's from originally, so it gives me an excuse to show some of the mountains there. And yeah, it's, I don't know, mountains are mountains. There's mountains, there's valleys, there's plains. I don't believe that would lead people away from using metal in your offensive implements. Would it affect the use of cavalry and chariots, things like that? Well, absolutely. Now I'd like to introduce my hypothesis, so something no one else has come up with that I could find. I think part of this comes down to the arms race component. If your opponents never don metal armor, then the need for you to hold a metal basher in your hand is far less. And since you weren't facing that in South America, but you would in, say, like ancient Greece, right? Think of like the phalanx soldier with that heavy bronze armor. Then these very talented metalsmiths, mentioned here in this paper, one of the academic papers I read, they're not needed for your offensive weapons. So they can make you something like this, but it really isn't necessary. This paper, as you might see there, is grappling with the question of, or at least touches on, why wasn't there a Bronze Age in South America? But regardless, we know there wasn't, and when it comes to warfare in particular, I think the lack of metal defensive implements combined with the religious importance of metal and the abundance of precious metals over, more common ones, gets us what we find in the time and place we're concerned with. And by the way, here you go in the light, you can see more of the silver. Now, something like this might give the user the belief that they're striking with divine power to a certain extent. Regardless, we're looking at a really rare thing here, right? I mean, this is in part, silver weapon, and it's truly silver. I mean, I know it's an alloy, but what I mean is that's imbued throughout the material. Sure, we can find swords from Europe and whatever, China, you name it, with gold and silver decoration. But that's entirely different. The precious metal in those cases, and anything else, warhammer, a mace, whatever, the precious metal is not an intrinsic part of the functioning component of the weapon. And this might all link back to the fact that, that's such a rare thing. It really is. Might go back to the fact that, there's a whole tangent of research on this, imbuing something in the native South American mind was of particular importance. They mixed gold with copper very often, purely for decorative religious objects. So that alloy was called a tumbaga, and it was very important. Maybe as prized as gold, it certainly was highly prized as well. And that's kind of a real foreign mindset, right? Like, that wouldn't have happened in Europe. Hey, let's take this gold and combine it with copper. It would be seen as a waste of gold, like diluting the gold. But as far as we can tell, it was the opposite here. It was like infusing that divinity into the entire object. Here's a quotation. "The basis of Indian enrichment systems is the incorporation of the essential ingredient, the gold or the silver, into the very body of the object. The essence of the object, that which appears superficially to be true of it, must also be inside it. In fact, the object is not that object unless it contains within it the essential quality, even if the essence is only minimally present." End quote. Pretty interesting. On a similar note, some ethno-historians specializing in the Andes recently talked about late 16th and early 17th century religious texts that talked about kamai, the act of infusing life spirit into an inanimate object. And just one more, sorry. The Mochica used these alloys to produce metal qualities that were obviously paramount for them, goldness and silveriness. And getting back to weapons and warfare, maybe that's why you have things like this and not very many humbler bronze versions, even though they knew how to make those. What other YouTube channel goes this deep when it comes to weapons research? Anyway, since I obviously like fist weapons, I had to hold it like this and wonder how that would work. I mean, wasn't meant for that at all, but I could see a cool kind of a Inca warrior-inspired knuckle duster coming out of this. Anyway, hope you enjoyed the video and seeing a very cool and a pretty unique object. Thanks.